So I'm going to talk about forensic science and transnational crime and the illegal ivory trade. And I want to just start by just giving you a feel for what I mean by forensic science, because a lot of times forensic science is just really focusing on, there's a seizure or something is caught, and then you ask, was it a listed species or not? And you find out it was, and then you're done, you go to court, and you get a prosecution. If you're lucky, you go to court. But this trade has gotten really bad, and we need to expand forensic science to really focus on intelligence gathering, to be able to anticipate crimes before they occur. And that's really important when you consider how big wildlife crime has become. It's now the 4th or 5th largest transnational organized crime in the world. A lot of people don't appreciate how serious that is. It's right under narcotics, weapons, human trafficking, cybercrime, and this is short. So it's really quite a serious problem. It's estimated to be about $20 billion a year trade in profits, and it's linked to other kinds of contraband, heroin trade, human trafficking, terrorism issues. And the ivory trade, which I'm going to focus most on today, is about $4 billion of that $20 billion. So it's serious in terms of national security, the economic impacts, but it's also serious in terms of elephants. Right now, we estimate that we're losing 40,000 elephants a year with only 400,000 elephants left in the world. That's 1/10 of the population. Now think about this. This is the largest land mammal in the world. Think about how much an elephant eats. Think about how much it modifies the habitat. How many species over millions of years have co-evolved to be dependent on the natural disturbances that these guys make, and we are wiping them out. What is the collateral damage to this? So it's really quite serious. And it's also very interesting that, in the last decade, there has been an enormous amount of attention on wildlife crime. Millions, tens of millions of dollars put into this. Organizations creating all kinds of clever ways to attack the problem, as we're seeing here today. But we are not making a dent in this. Sorry, it's a little contrary to what you were saying, but really, if you look at the number of animals being killed, we are making such slow progress for the amount of effort being put into this. And that's a really scary, depressing thing. And the question is why? And I think that one of the biggest reasons, at least for the ivory trade, is the fact that transnational criminals have become experts at capitalizing on the permissiveness of world trade. There is so much effort right now to move commerce and keep it moving through our ports. Much of ivory is containerized, put in a container, and shipped on boats, on ships like this. There are 1 billion of these containers shipped around the world each year. So if you are a transnational criminal, all you got to do is get your ivory into a container and get it into transit, and the ability for law enforcement to track that and figure out where it's ending up is extremely small. If you think about the United States, we can inspect about 1% to 2% of the containers moving through our ports. And when you talk to these law enforcement agencies, they say, you have no idea the pressure we're under. If we think a container has contraband and we want to stop it, and we stop it for more than an hour or two, we get sued because we're disrupting commerce. And so the whole thing is just getting things into transit, and you got it made. And then you have these sophisticated criminal networks that are expert at tricking the system. For example, most big ivory seizures are shipped out of a different country from where they're poached. Because if you're trying to predict where's the container, is this a container we're shipping, you have an algorithm that says that it come from a high-risk source country going to an end-user country. Well, they just started at a different country. Very often, if you put pressure on these transit countries, they can just shift because transit countries can easily move. Oftentimes, a shipment goes and it's on the way to one destination, and then midway they send an email and say ship it someplace else. So you have all this ability to trick the system, and makes it extremely really hard to to be able to figure out where are these crimes happening. So we wanted to develop an intelligence-based methodology that allows us to be able to attack the trade before it enters transit. We wanted to figure out where is the source of all this poaching, how concentrated is it around Africa? You can put 5 United States in Africa. Can we tell where the focal points are? And also, can we tell where the major exporters are moving the ivory out of Africa so we can get it before it enters trade, and hopefully the advantage there is you prevent the elephant from being killed in the first place. Because even when you get a big seizure, those animals are already dead. So we've got an urgent problem, and we need to shift this focus to getting it before the product gets into transit. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to stop demand. Of course we need to do that over the long term, but we have an urgent problem here, and it's about time we opened our eyes and recognized that. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we do is we develop DNA methods to be able to track the origin of large ivory seizures. It's a seizure over a half a ton. Now, why large seizures? 70% of all ivory seized is in these large seizures. They're also worth about $1 million minimum, these seizures. So these are the big guys. These are the transnational organized criminals that are making huge profits, responsible for killing the bulk of the elephants that around the world. And what we tried to do was to develop DNA methods to be able to determine the origin of these poached, of these large seizures, to figure out where are these hotspots actually occurring across Africa. Now, the way we did it is with poop. So my lab is an expert in poop. Sometimes I'm called the guru of doo-doo, which I actually love that term, because it turns out it's the most accessible animal product in the world that there is from wildlife, and there is so much physiological, genetic information, immunological information in these scat samples, and if you can collect it, you've really got a treasure trove of information. So an elephant poop weighs about 25 pounds, pretty easy to find. And so we started collecting samples across the continent of Africa using our colleagues and ourselves, and we were able to generate very comprehensive gene frequency maps from getting the DNA out of the dung for both forest and savanna elephants across Africa. And that's me, so ignore the bald spot right there. And basically, this is where we have forest elephant samples. This is where we have savanna elephant samples. Each one of those X's has anywhere between 2 and 95 samples. They are genotyped to 16 different microsatellite loci. So just to give you an idea, put that into perspective, the FBI crime lab, CODIS, to track human criminals, uses 13 microsats. Same thing with the Interpol database. We use 16 same kinds of markers to get us high precision. And we test our precision because we take one of those X's out, which may be, 50 samples. We know exactly where they came from, and then we blindly assign them in our model to see how close to the actual origin do we get. And we can get a sample from anywhere in Africa to less than 300 kilometers from where it actually originated. That's 5 United States fits in Africa. That's really high precision, and sometimes the only place within that 300-kilometer area that has elephants is just one park, so you get it actually to the park. So that's very important, and what we do is once we got the map, we then develop ways to get DNA out of the ivory. We take a piece of ivory from about the size of a quarter from the base of the tusk, where it's the last part of the ivory to grow, very rich in DNA, and then we extract that by first taking about the first digit of your baby finger worth of ivory and stick it in these polycarbonated tubes with a magnet and a stainless steel plug on each end, drop it in that liquid nitrogen, minus 240 degrees, shift the magnetic field. Am I talking fast enough? Here. Shift the magnetic field back and forth about 10 times per second, and within a minute and a half it comes out like baby powder. You then demineralize it by just sticking it in a chemical called EDTA, same thing is in the tubes when they draw your blood, and separates the minerals from the ivory, and then we take the same genetic markers and match it to our map to figure out where the seizures come from. Well, to our amazement, over the last decade, virtually 100% of all large seizures came from 2 places. Now imagine how, that's not all poaching going on in Africa, but this is the majority of the poaching done by the big guys. And that was a game changer. And we also were able to show that these seizures, as I mentioned, they're never shipped out of the country where they were poached. And so we started getting a lot of intelligence about how these strategies were working. Now we knew these focal areas. And just to give you an idea, so 78% of all ivory is coming out of right here. It's all savanna ivory, focused primarily on Tanzania, starting from northern Mozambique through Tanzania up to southern Kenya. And we first sounded this alarm in 2007. And it took almost a decade to finally start to get this thing under control. And seizure after seizure after seizure are coming here. And so this is frustrating, to say the least. 22% of the ivory is coming from forest elephants from this place called the Tridom, which is the corner between northeast Gabon, northwest Republic of Congo, and southeast Cameroon. This is the last stronghold of forest elephants in Africa. 95% of the forest elephants have been killed in the last 50 years, 62% in the last decade. So, you know, of course that's where all the ivories come from. That's where they're all, someplace they're left. So this is all really important to help focus that these are the areas where we need to concentrate. So, of course, you think, oh, that's great. So now we got law enforcement, we know where to put them. But it's not so simple, because poachers don't go into a park and kill 1,000 elephants at once. They go up there in these gangs, they're not that big of gangs, and they can only poach as much as they can carry. They sell that to the middlemen, and then eventually it moves up to these cartels that are exporting it out of Africa. So really, you want to not only get these guys on the ground, you want to get the cartels that are moving the stuff out, and we also want to know how many of those guys are there. And then we made an interesting, lucky discovery. When we go to analyze seizures, the first thing we do, it's expensive to analyze a tusk. It's about $120 a tusk. And so you don't want to analyze both tusks from the same animal, because you're wasting your money asking to analyze the same animal twice. And so we realized that the diameter of the tusk at the base, the color, and the gum line, where the ivory protrudes from the lip of the elephant, is all highly symmetrical. And going through the seizures, you can match the pairs. So all these are pairs. And when we started to do that, we realized that over half the tusks in our seizure did not have a matching pair. And I thought, what is going on? Where's the other tusk? And then I started thinking about how ivory is moving. These poachers are separating it. They're getting it to these middlemen. It's moving up to where it's being shipped. And by the time it gets there, the two tusks there's no reason for them to stay together. They get separated. And I thought, well, if one tusk is going out in one seizure and another tusk, we can genetically match it perfectly by these 16 markers. We can show that if they went through the same port close in time, same guy packed both seizures. Well, lo and behold, we found lots of matches. And think about it, we don't analyze all the tusks. We analyze 30% of the tusks in this seizure, 30% in this seizure. That means you have a 9% chance of having the tusks from the same elephant in both seizures to match. Not very high, but we got lots of matches. And when you look over all those big seizures, we found the three biggest exporting cartels in Africa. One based in Entebbe, Uganda, that's what the orange dots are. The other one coming out of Mombasa, and the other one coming out of Togo. And I'm going to just drill down in this a little bit. I'll start with this one to just give you an idea of the implications. So this is where it was seized. This is the date it was seized. This is the size. So seized in Uganda, October 2013, weighed 2.9 tons. This is where it was transited out of. The blue circles are where we genetically assign their origin. When there's a red dot connected by arrows, it means that this tusk and this tusk, they're genetically identical to those two. So you can see now that these three seizures are all connected. They are all shipped close in time, and they all went through the same port. Same guy packed them. Just to give you an idea of the implications of this, so this guy who was responsible for this seizure, they busted him. So Uganda Wildlife Authority said, we're prosecuting him, can you give us the report? I said, yeah, I'll give you the report, but this guy is connected to at least 2 other major seizures. He's a transnational organized criminal, means you can try him not on a wildlife law, which tends to be weaker, but actually as a major crime. Not only that, I don't know if any of you remember, in December 2012, front page New York Times, helicopters that were paid for by the U.S. government to Uganda for the Uganda People Defense Force to be able to find Kony, Lord's Resistance Army, child soldier guy, who has his minions poach ivory to pay for weapons. Well, those helicopters of the Air Force were photographed flying over the northeast corner of Garamba National Park. 2 days later, they found 22 elephants shot in the top of the head, no tusks, no tracks going in and out. The helicopter was responsible for killing them. Maybe not that helicopter, but it seemed pretty likely that they were. We found tusks were sent to us from Entebbe Airport that were seized a couple months later. 35 tusks, 22 elephants seemed like a match. New York Times said it was a match. It wasn't. But then, when we started to realize we could match these tusks to these seizures, we could actually find a connection. And sure enough, I found all the tusks in this seizure. So now this guy is responsible for 3 crimes, major seizures, plus a major international incident. He's in big trouble now. Here's another one. This guy is perhaps the most notorious ivory trafficker in Africa. His name is Faisal Muhammad Ali. He was just sentenced to 20 years in prison. Our work connecting him all these different seizures was instrumental in this court case to bring him down, which was really important. So all of these are connected, going from 2011 through 2013. I'm going to come back to this seizure in a minute. 6 tons. Huge seizure, and you'll note it's got ivory from both hotspots. But right now we're just focusing on this part. So this was really a big deal because he got convicted because they had a lot of information. Well, this guy seemed to be the driver of both seizures. Well, we showed genetically he absolutely was, and they all connected back to Faisal. And then the data that we were getting all of a sudden got very interesting for the DEA, because it turned out that Faisal, who we thought was the biggest cartel in East Africa, was about the 5th tier down of a major heroin network of the Akasha brothers. And in fact, the Akasha brothers were the biggest heroin traffickers in East Africa, and they were bragging about using ivory, about also selling ivory, and the DEA got wind of it. They asked for our information. These guys were just extradited into the United States, and in fact, their main supplier is the Sultan, who is the biggest heroin dealer in Pakistan. And we found evidence in one of our seizures to help us figure out how they were laundering the money, but I can't tell you that or they'll shoot me. So anyways, the last one I want to just kind of talk about is very interesting because remember, Faisal's connected to this seizure. Well, this seizure is also connected to the other major hotspot. And so how does that happen? And it turned out that all this ivory here there are 2,300 tusks in this seizure, 6 tons, and 2/3 of it were from here. They put it on a boat and they moved it up to Togo. And when it got to Togo, at sometime around the same time, ivory that was poached at the second hotspot was also moved to Togo and shipped out. But part of the, and added to the shipment before it shipped, as was this ivory right here from West Africa, from a place called Penjari or program Project W, Park W, which is the last stronghold of elephants in West Africa, which has already been wiped out. Now, what was interesting was this seizure right here was the only one that we got that actually wasn't from a hotspot that was moving stuff out of West Africa. It wasn't coming from here. There were a few tusks in there. Most of it were right here, but this was a different kind of seizure. This was seized in the warehouse of a man named Emil Mbuki, who was allegedly the largest ivory dealer in West Africa. He was convicted because of our evidence and other evidence on aging the samples. He got the maximum sentence in Togo, which is 2 years. He's already out. And meanwhile, he's complaining the whole time, I'm not the big dealer who you think I am. I was framed. And sure enough, we found that one of the tusks in his warehouse was a perfect match to one of the tusks in this 6-ton massive seizure that's connected to Faisal. So now we've got a big, stronger connection between him, and in fact, maybe he was even the guy who packed the seizure. And then, just a few months later, there was 4 tons of ivory, 4,000 kilos of ivory shipped out of Togo again. This guy was strongly suspected to be the person responsible. Most of the ivory came from this hotspot, but again, there were some with that West African signature. And then, oddly, there's 2 Savannah tusks in there. How the heck did those 2 tusks get into that seizure? And when we looked, they were a perfect match. So what we realized, this ivory moved on a ship to here. This ivory was brought in afterwards. He probably packed this seizure, put some ivory from his warehouse in here before he shipped it out. And meanwhile, he probably found these 2 huge tusks in here, and he said, I'm keeping those. And then he got greedy because he's going to be in jail, and he knew it, and he shipped them back out and caught him. So we linked them to all of those. So all of a sudden, all these networks start to grow. In fact, the Entebbe network that we've looked at was separate from the Mombasa. As we've done more seizures, we connected it to that seizure too. So these guys are big guys. And so when you put it all together, if you take this forensic information, we can detect the major hotspots where the ivory is sourced. We can actually use that information to then get an idea of where is it moving out of Africa by getting these major cartels, and to then link the two together with intelligence and really work to solve these problems. And when you look at it, the last bit of data I just want to mention really quickly is that this is these three connected seizures here. When you look at the distribution of these tusks, of the tusks in these seizures that all match, they're very, very similar. And that suggests that this big dealer moving the ivory out is probably driving the operations in the other country where the poaching is happening. So there's one big happy connection here. And ultimately, applying this kind of intelligence information is really critical because it's the best way to save these elephants, to stop the mortality in the first place, and it's the best way to keep this ivory from leaving Africa before it enters into transit, where it gets far more difficult and expensive to trace. And so I'm going to end by just saying we are now doing this project on pangolins, applying the same technology with support of the Wildlife Crime Tech Challenge. I understand there's a video of it playing out there in the lounge, and I want to thank you all.